Have you ever wondered why some of the best guitarists of all time can play a really simple sounding phrase and make it sound really interesting and musical? However, when we try and do the exact same thing ourselves, something sounds off. We sound kind of boring and uninspiring. Well, most likely, the secret to making simple phrases sound musical lies in the triads. So today we're going to look at the tricks that pros are using, like Jimi Hendrix, to make simple phrases sound a lot more interesting by understanding the triads that we're playing over the top of. And again, some of these pros, they might not even be conscious or aware of what they're doing. However, this is what is making their phrases sound so interesting. So today we're going to look at how to do this over the solo for Hey Joe. And I'm just going to put a little loop down for the chord progression of Hey Joe. And the first thing we need to do is understand the chords that we need to play over the top of. So we have C major to G major, D major to A major, and then we kind of resolve everything to this E major over here. And that goes on for a bit longer than everything else, right? And we're going to look at this phrase. Just the little kind of start of the solo. We're going to kind of break down what's going on there and see where the notes line up with the chords that we're playing over the top of. So, before doing this, the first most important thing to do before you play any solo, before you improvise any solo, or even before you start learning a solo and trying to analyze it, is to understand where to play those triads of the chord progression on the neck, right? So we can do all of that in a kind of close space over here around this E minor pentatonic box. So we've got C major like this here, G major like this here, D major like this here, A major like this here, then E major that we can play over here, which is right over the top of that pentatonic box. Now, what we want to do now is then analyze the parts of these phrases that are emphasized the most. The kind of parts that the guitarist holds on to rather than playing a load of notes. And we can see that with the very first note. This little bend over here. This note that I'm bending into the note E, which is actually part of the C major triad, right? So if I play this, that C major triad over there, that note E is inside there. So we can see right off the bat, right off the way that Jimmy starts this phrase, he's bending into a chord tone that is part of this solo. That's why it sounds so musical. All you have to do is just play one note, it's going to work. Doesn't matter how you articulate it, you could slide into it, you could hammer on, you could bend into that note, but it works because it's part of the chords that you're playing over the top of. Now the other part of this phrase, he lands on the note G, which again, the note G is going to be in the note G in the chord G major. So right off the bat, the first half of that phrase is following the chord tones perfectly. It's following the chord progression perfectly. We go from the C and then to the G, right? This is why it sounds so musical. You can get away with just playing only those two notes for that phrase, and it's going to sound interesting. Right? This is the skeleton of what makes the phrases work. Because he's actually hitting those chord tones. Once you hit those chord tones, you can kind of sprinkle more stuff around that. The important part is finalizing around those chord tones of the triad. So let's look at the rest of this phrase as well, right? Just give me a second for the chords to loop around again, right? So we have he's ending the phrase, ending the kind of all of the kind of soloing bit on this note E over the chord E. That's why it works so much, right? We're perfectly aligned with those chord tones. So I'm going to give you an example of where I play this phrase. I'm going to simplify things and only follow chord tones. It sounds musical, right, when I do that. I'm not kind of playing random stuff. I know exactly what the chords are and I'm following them. And you can substitute out any of these chord tones. You could either play a root, a third, or a fifth. So let's see how I can change it. Right? As long as you play a root, third, or a fifth and follow the chords underneath, you're going to sound musical, right? As long as you got that little underlying structure going on, you know where those chord tones land and resolve, you can start decorating it. Right? As long as you know where you're going to end and where you're emphasizing each chord, you can decorate it with scale tones around there. It's all about understanding the underlying structure of the chords and seeing where those triads line up and how you can hit parts of those triads. Again, it doesn't matter if it's a root, doesn't matter if it's a third, doesn't matter if it's a fifth. As long as it's part of that triad shape and you're kind of hitting that note for each chord that comes along, you're going to sound musical. You can get away with just playing one note and you can be as simple as possible. But that's what makes the music work. That's what makes it sound interesting, right? So what I want you to do when you're learning solos, like from someone like Jimi Hendrix, or someone like John Frusciante, maybe John Mayer, or even David Gilmour, someone like that, right? I want you to just look at how they play the solo phrase by phrase, and see where they emphasize certain notes, and then identify how that note lines up with the chord they're playing over the top of. Most likely, it's part of a triad that is right around the fretboard, right? I want you to identify where these triads are and see how you can hit them. Maybe change that note for a different part of the triad. Maybe instead of landing on a third, land on a fifth instead, right? And you can kind of start to modify people's phrases a bit, but still get the essence of the solo when you change from a root note to a third or something like that, right? You still get the kind of essence and the skeleton of the solo. You can kind of modify it your own way, and you start to understand more about music by doing this. So and it allows you to kind of come up with more ideas in the same kind of style, right? By just changing certain parts. You get continuity in your playing. You can still kind of keep the same essence of the solo. I can take this same kind of phrase and just change it slightly and go on forever pretty much. And the reason for that is because I know where these triads are. I know where to hit each note. I can see around this fretboard where those kind of triads are, and I know where to kind of just hit certain points of them. And it all starts with just playing the triad together, right? If you can't do the individual notes and make an interesting sounding phrase yet, just play like this. Just do that to start off, right? And then once you're comfortable with doing that, just pick one note inside. Maybe that was a really boring example that time, but let's try a different one, right? Maybe about like pairing two notes together now, right? So we can go like whole time I'm still kind of following those those triads. Now we can try arpeggiating them. And that's going to allow you to understand where you kind of want to ground yourself around, right? And once you're comfortable with this, you can then start thinking about decorating with those scale notes that surround it. And again, you don't have to do this with just a Hey Joe solo. I want you to try and do this every time you're learning a new solo, is to understand where these players are hitting those chord tones. And when you play that note, see where that kind of relates to a triad shape that you already know. It's all about understanding the chords that you're playing over the top of, and how to emphasize them, how to kind of highlight those chords, instead of just like randomly hitting scale notes. You want to be more intentional, just keep it simple, right? You only really have to play one note for each chord, and then just kind of decorate it a couple notes up and down and stuff like that, right? There's really not much going on, but this is how we can take really simple ideas and phrases and make them sound more musical, rather than just playing guesswork with scales. Now, if you enjoyed this video, there is another one you can check out over here. I also recommend you join our school community. There's a link for that in the description. And if you're looking to level up your triads even further, I have a triad masterclass that you can book with me. Again, there is a link in the description. We go over how to learn every single major and minor arpeggio shape all across the guitar, allowing you to kind of understand every single shape, use them in your playing, find them in solos, and master the instrument even more.